We are at number 58 in our long-running series, doing these almost every 2 weeks. We had to cancel last week because of some scheduling and projects and that sort of thing. But we're back on track, and today number 58 is all about session management. The reason I selected this topic is because, well, we typically do these webinars to announce new things, show you new features, new capabilities, but also we try to fit in some how-to stuff. And the how-to stuff is typically inspired from real-world customers, real-world projects, and hearing on phone calls and meetings, gee, how do we do this? We'd like to do that. If I hear something more than once, then I know it's probably webinar worthy. And I've been hearing questions related to sort of managing Servoy's stateful sessions a lot recently. So of course we start every one of these tech webinars with demos so that if you decide it's not for you, you can bail before you get to all the boring slides. Today I have kind of 3 or 4 demos here. And we're going to talk about, excuse me, managing sessions in terms of when the session should be timed out from the server side. Also handling what happens if the user themselves are kind of idle in the client. We'll look at ways to programmatically access what's happening in all of your sort of connected sessions. And we'll take a real world look at some custom session rules and how to use that programmatic access. I think it's worth noting before we dive in here that Servoy is different from a lot of other platforms in that we provide a stateful client session for every connected user. And with that comes a lot of great power, but then also some of the questions that arise with, well, what do you do if a user closes their tab and then reopens it or navigates away and hits the back button? What happens to the session? These types of things. So that's what I'd like to dive into. For the first example, what I'd like to do is bring up a little solution that I made this morning, and it is called Example Session Management. And what I've done is I've made a little login here. I'm going to log in as myself, and away we go. Okay, little form here. Now, what I'd like to focus on is not the application itself, but what's going on in the sort of on the back end. And for that, I've brought up the Servoy admin page. And for those of you new to Servoy, this is a very commonly used part of the platform. This is where you can go and have a look at the overall application server. So lots of stuff here that you could get into. But for this particular demo, we want to look at this session over here and what's going on there. So you can see that it's tracking sort of when it was first connected, how long it's been idle, and that's sort of idle on the server, and I'll explain what that means. And also, if you look, excuse me, at the client ping times, you can see that the server is sort of keeping track of that client, because a web server doesn't really know what the status of what's happening in a browser unless it communicates with it. So in this case, it's you can see that the WebSocket ping, as I reload, you can see it's responding. Now, if I come back here, we'll get to this in a second. That's my next demo. I'm going to log back in. It's still the same session. I'm going to come into here, and let's say that I'm using this and I hit the browser tab, or I hit the browser X out tab. Now, if I restore that tab, Control-Shift-T in my browser, it comes right back to what I was doing. So I'm still logged in. That stateful session is preserved because it hasn't been cleaned up on the server. You can see that the connected time is the same, and that ping time just keeps going up. So the server's keeping track of the browser. Even though I closed it, I could still go back. I could navigate away and hit the back button, and the result would be the same. Now, let's say that I close it and then I don't come back after a certain time. Well, then what happens is eventually this is going to get cleaned up. And so I want to show you the setting that manages that, because I see a lot of questions on our forum. I deal with a lot of questions in customer projects. So if you go to the application server homepage and you scroll down to an NG client setting here called Sablo window timeout in seconds. Now I have set this to 10 seconds, which is pretty short, which means that after about 10 seconds of idle time, meaning not idle, the user's not doing anything, meaning really the client is disconnected. The browser's not responding to WebSocket requests. After about 10 seconds, we want to go ahead and clean up this session to get rid of it. So if I go back to my clients here, now you can see that it's already timed out. That browser that I X'd out has been cleaned up, so that stateful session is now gone. I'm going to hit the Control-Shift-T to try to bring it back, and you can see that I have to re-log in again, that my stateful session is not there available for me. So you have control over, again, over this setting. I'll go back to it. It's this under NG client, Sablo window timeout in seconds. You have control over that, and one of the real world cases we see is that, well, the default is 60 seconds. So if you don't touch this and you just start your Servoy application, your session will be reclaimed after 60 seconds. And in general, you want that to be a low number. You want it to be pretty quick, because if a user has left, then they're probably not coming back. Or if they do come back, you want them to just relog in. One of the examples that I ran into is a customer we're working with who does a lot of like greenhouse management systems, agricultural and logistics, and they have a mobile app that is for tracking deliveries. So the driver actually has this mobile application, and maybe they're driving for 3 hours, and they become disconnected because of spotty cell tower reception, etc. Well, in that situation, we actually want to keep the client alive so that the next time they pick up the application, it's right where they left off. So in that case, we set that to a very high number, maybe several hours. So that's one real world example where you may want to change this. And usually if you want to change this, it's because you want it to be longer. You're expecting internet disruptions. So that's kind of my first demo. It's more of a look at sort of how things work and how we're identifying how these sessions are handled on the server. And typically it's these dates you see here, when it was first connected, how long it's been idle, when was the last ping from the WebSocket. Now the second example I want to show is measuring idle time in the client, which you got a sneak peek of that a minute ago. So I'm going to go ahead and log in here, and while I'm working here, I may be clicking, I may be typing things in the keyboard. All of that time I'm able to track while the user's busy. Now if I were to close the window or navigate away, or just stop using my mouse, I might start wanting to count and say, hey, after about a minute or so of that, we want to ask the user if they're still working. So while I'm leaving that up, I'm going to go ahead and let that go idle and sort of go under the hood and show you how I've set that up. So in my application here, example session management, I have created this this on open handler, and so this method here is called when the application first loads. And I'm saying that after 90 seconds, I want the application to time out. So I'm using this plugin SVY idle, and it has one method on idle. Now this is something that's available through the Web Package Manager. So if you go to Web Packages and download and install with Web Package Manager, and go to NG Services, takes a minute to load here. you'll see it there called idle web service. So if you just click the plus button, it'll install it. And then down here under plugins, you will see it. It's called SVY idle. There it is at the very bottom. It has one method on idle. And basically what you're doing is you're telling it what you want to have happen when you realize that the user is gone idle. And so the first argument is your callback. So if I go to that function, it's right here below. And basically what I'm doing is I print a little message out to the console, but what you saw on the client was I'm showing this dialog saying your session has been logged out due to inactivity, and then I call security.logout, so they're actually kicked out of the application. The reason that we created this plugin is we were working with a software vendor that creates financial applications, so applications for banks, and they were making a consumer mobile banking app. And typically when you work with sensitive data like financial data, you don't want to leave applications sitting around idle. So if you walk away from your computer or you set your phone down, that then someone could pick it up a few minutes later and just already logged in and make a bank transfer or something. So they wanted a pretty short idle timeout. And in this case, we're measuring idleness in terms of the users, what they're doing, if they're using the application down in the client. So it's pretty simple. You pass in the on idle callback. There's a couple other things there, like it's actually showing when the user is gone idle, when they come back, then it goes back to this on active. And I can actually launch this in the NG client right here from developer and show this to you. Just give it a second to launch. Meanwhile, you can see back here, my first session says you've been logged out due to inactivity, and then when I click close, it boots you out of the system. So why don't we take this down to something really small, like 10 seconds or 10,000 milliseconds, and I'll go ahead and log in. And I'm going to bring up the console over here, and you can see it says application started with idle timeout. And now it says user idle. You can see that it printed it out. So I've already hit that method, and then this pops up. Other things you can do is if you minimize it, you can see that it calls application hidden. And when I restore that guy, you can see it says application shown. It's also saying that the user became active again. But at this point, because of security concerns, I want to say the first time they go idle, I'm going to log them out, but it'll actually keep calling that idle every, whatever the interval is. In this case, every 10 seconds where the user's not doing anything, it'll keep calling it. So it's not necessarily that you always have to log them out. You can do what you want here. It's up to you. So this is a nice little plugin that my colleague made, and it's available through the Web Package Manager, and this is how you use it. Again, the use case is typically that you want to log someone out if they've gone idle, or you want to ask them if they're still using it, that sort of thing. The third demo that we're going to do here is to show programmatic access to the stateful sessions. So this is more like you have a manager application or you want to enforce some custom rules. So what I will do is, we can go ahead and close that one. I'm going to fire up a couple of these clients just in different tabs. And I'm going to go ahead and log into them with different users. I'll put Jan in there too. Okay. Now I'm going to go to this one in my sessions list, and you can see that I've actually created a form that's showing me the connected sessions. So you can see that I have the user that was logged in, the IP address. In this case, everything's localhost, so that's not very exciting. And you can see that there's like the host name of the computer, the solution that was loaded, and then some of these times here. And if I were to refresh this, then I would see those update. The same as you see on the application server. However, the reason that I'm showing you this is I was once working with a customer who wanted to have sort of a super user be able to log in and see who else was logged in and, you know, kick them off or that sort of thing. And this is the way that you can do that. The other thing you can do is you can programmatically shut down the clients by clicking one of these, or you can send them a message. So let's say that I want to go to the first one that was logged in and send a message, hello world. And you can see there's a little notification over here in my browser. This one has already been logged out due to inactivity, but it's still an active session, and you can see the message there. I can come back here and then shut them down. Are you sure you want to? Yes. And now, although the modal dialog is still there, the page is actually expired. If I configured a logout page, it would be redirected, but I get the default here. So there you can see that from one client, I programmatically booted another client. I also sent them a message. So you could do things like that. There's actually a lot more you could do because there's a whole broadcasting API, but that was covered in a prior webinar, so we won't get into that. I just want to show you that you can do this, and if we look under the hood and we go to the form that is showing, it's called sessions. And you can see that I just made a grid here and I put some fields on here, but the data source that this form is based off of, I made it an in-memory data source, and I'm loading it by using the Client Manager plugin. So I'll show you the code here called load client sessions. And this gets called when the form first loads and it tries to initialize that found set. And the important part here is we do have webinars all about how to use in-memory tables. So I would ignore this part and go check out that webinar. But it's really this part here, this plugins.clientmanager. It gets a list of these connected clients. And here what I'm doing is I'm just creating rows in a temporary table with all of the information there. And that because that's a data-bound form, it just happens automatically. It shows up in that grid. And then there was a couple actions there in sessions. If you look behind these buttons, when I went to shut it down, plugins client manager shut down, and I just grabbed that client ID, or send message, and again I just grabbed that client ID. So pretty easily you could manage a list of clients. Some things I didn't show that I wish I had more time to show would be you can also attach custom session information to each client. So if you wanted to know which clients are doing this or that, they can sort of post their own, inject their own variables or session information, and you can find clients based on that, and you can look at their custom info. So you could do this at a much more nuanced level. And again, there's also a whole broadcasting API for sending like information packets back and forth between clients on different channels, and there's a whole other webinar on that. But this is just to let you know that you can programmatically see and manage sessions. And I want to show you a real world use case why you might want to do that. And I was working with a customer who wanted to be able to enforce the rule that that a user could only log in once at a time. By default, Servoy doesn't limit you based on user or tenant or anything. You can log in as many sessions as you want with the same credentials or what have you. So now what I've done is created a rule that says you can't log in to the same session under the same username more than once. So I'm going to log into this one, and I have my idle timeout set pretty low, so I have to do it quickly. So I'm going to log in as Sean, and I'm going to log in over here under the same username. And now you can see I get this message that the login has failed because I've already logged into another session, and my custom rule is that only one session is permitted per user. So I could just cancel and be stuck here on the login screen, or I could say, hey, I'm not using that other session. I left it on my computer at home. Here it is over here. I want to close that other session. And you can see this one gets the boot. It's already gets that error page or the expired page. Of course, that could be custom. You could also show a dialog that says you've been logged out or what have you. And over here now I'm logged in. That's an example where I want to have some custom sort of session management built into the application, and I use that client manager plugin to do that. And we can take a look real quick at how that was done. If we jump into the onLogin method, you can see that at the beginning, what I do is I check for another user session. So I wrote a little sub method down here, get user session. And what it does is it gets that list of connected clients again from the client manager plugin, and it loops over those clients. And if the username matches the username that we're trying to log in as, it returns it back. And so I'm saying if there is another session, then I sort of hold on to that because I might want to close it. And then I'm asking the user what they want to do. And if they do decide to close it, then I call that shutdown client. So the same example I showed you before, however, this one has a more real world use case. And then after all that's done, I proceed with the login as normal and just log that user in. So that's the real world use case for one of the use cases for programmatic session management. I'm going to sort of do a quick overview and then we'll get some questions. So let's go back into presentation mode here. So the first demo we looked at was what I call server-side timeout setting. And this is really determining how long you want to keep alive clients which are really disconnected, meaning the server can no longer see, and I'm doing air quotes here, no longer see the client because of some disruption to the WebSocket connection. So they've stopped responding. And what do you want to do? Do you want to leave them open for a really long time? Do you want to close them quickly? It's up to you. You use this this setting that you can find on the administration page. And again, the real world use case for that is when you do expect a loss of network, then you would maybe want to bump that up to a high level so you can give users the freedom to reconnect automatically and keep their session even if they've had a network disruption. So common maybe for mobile applications or applications where you might lose internet. The default, by the way, is 60 seconds, so you do want to keep it low if you don't expect loss of network. The other demo we looked at was what I call client-side timeout. So this is really detecting if the user's not doing something and if you want to time them out. This uses the SVY idle plugin. It's available through the Web Package Manager and on a GitHub repository. And what this does is it measures idle time down in the browser. And this would be measured on things like if they're moving the mouse or they're touching a touch screen or they're tapping on the keyboard. Actually, what events you want to capture and measure are up to you. I didn't show that, but this is quite some configuration allowed. And it will also detect if the user is become idle or gone back to being active or gone back to being idle, and it'll just give you a call back every time. Also, if they have minimized or restored the window, and we saw that. But all of this you can respond to with custom code as you see fit, and here's what it looks like. So again, there's a typo there. It should say just plugins, SVY idle. But you call the on idle, you pass in the callback, and you can see down below that function on idle, and you do whatever you want. So it's really one line of code, and then you're calling your custom code. Again, the real world use case for this is, what I've seen anyway, is that you have sensitive data. So we work with a lot of applications that deal with financial data or healthcare or other personal information, and you want to leave that kind of unexposed. So the moment that you think a user is no longer in front of their screen and keyboard or phone, you want to quickly log them out. And that's the use case for this, and you can just do that at your discretion, again, with custom code. The third demo we saw was to show programmatic access to sessions. So this was using the Client Manager plugin, and this is to see across the whole application server and see all the sessions which are connected. And it allows you to get info about each session. So we saw host name, IP address, username, and the application they're logged into, that sort of thing. You can send messages to those clients if you want to say like you're about to be disconnected or something like that. You can also have programmatic broadcast access, and this is covered in a prior webinar, but you can really build up a almost like a peer-to-peer kind of communication protocol, but that's a bit of a different topic. The code for it looks something like this. You get the Client Manager plugin, you get a list of connected clients, then you can get information about them, and maybe you decide you want to shut one down or send one a message. Then you just call those methods. And again, that's the Client Manager plugin. That ships by default. You don't have to install it separately. It's one of the default plugins. Real world use case, from what I've seen, is typically like you want to have some custom enforcement of sessions. So the default isn't good enough. And I've seen it typically by user and by tenant. We say this user can only log in one time. Otherwise, you kick them out of their other session, which is the one I've shown, or give them the option to. Another one I've seen is by tenant, where we get customers want to license so we deal a lot with software vendors at Servoy, and we want them to be able to enforce whatever licensing they want. And what I hear sometimes is, hey, this tenant pays for concurrency, not for named users. So they're allowed to have 10 users on the system at one time. How do I enforce the 10 user rule? Well, this is a great way to do it because you can add some custom info to the session. We didn't show this part, but it's pretty easy to do. It's just a line of code. Add some custom info to a session, and then you could say, okay, this tenant is logging in. Now get me all of the sessions that are already active for this tenant, and if you see they've hit their max, then you can do whatever you want. So again, Servoy facilitates kind of a licensing model of your choice if you're a software vendor, and this is kind of where the rubber meets the road if you want to do that using that Client Manager plugin. Okay, I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to ask Jan to help me with that. In the meantime, I want to leave up this slide, which gives us some information about Servoy World if you haven't taken that info down.
Cool, thanks. Thanks for the great overview. Yeah, very briefly, the more advanced people in Servoy already know, but if you're new to Servoy, you may not know, a lot of session management in Servoy is done automatically for you, like state management. So managing your state, unlike in many other web applications, is kind of tough. In Servoy, you make that really easy and straightforward and transparent. You typically don't even have to think about it at all, because automatically for every user that is connected, a server-side state is managed, where you can have data, variables, data sets, security settings that continue to run as the user is connected until they time out. And how you time out was a big topic in this session. Couple of questions here. One from Gordon: is the sablo.window.timeout affected by the Tomcat session length? So in Sean's example, can you set it for, say, 3 hours? Will Tomcat affect this?
I believe that this is kind of like a subset of that, because a Servoy session is kind of a stateful envelope that gets initiated once you start a Servoy application, and whether or not it's considered to be connected is based on the WebSocket response. If for some reason you have a session that is still responding, then I don't think it will be overridden by the Tomcat timeout, because that's just sort of more like the HTTP session. So unless it was, I can't see a situation where that would happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a question from Imre. Is there a property within Client Manager plugin that can distinguish between NG or headless client?
Yes, and I had that kind of in the code, but I didn't point it out at all, so I can do that really quickly. if you look at the example where I was loading those client sessions, there is one method in the plugin as you're looping over the sessions here, get application type, and that returns a constant, which I'm going to just ask for code complete here because I can never remember it. Application types, and then you get one of these. So it'll match one of those. So if it was a non-ng client and we have other client types, then you could compare it and see which one it is.
Cool.
So definitely yes.
And a question from Matt: does the SVY idle plugin work in Smart Client too?
No, that's only for the ng client because it's measuring activity in the browser.
Okay, but I guess there are other ways in Smart Client to do it. I think I saw something on the forum some point in time.
Yeah, I can't remember. I think there's a plugin or something to measure that. Is it a busy plugin or I can't remember.
Okay, cool. All right, there's a comment from Rafi that he's using it already and it works great with web notifications. So that's good to hear from Rafi. All right, guys, we're 5 minutes late, so we're going to end this and we will post the recording shortly, as usual, first on the YouTube channel and then later on to the website's archive, where you can always watch these webinars when you're coding or when you need some timeout of your coding. So thanks all for attending, Sean for presenting, and we look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks.